The enchanted ceiling of the great hall had been displaying a pleasant autumn evening when Harry first sat down to dinner. Wispy clouds drifting across a deepening blue sky, the occasional star beginning to twinkle into existence. He'd been reaching for the shepherd's pie when Hermione's fork clattered against her plate. "That's not right," she said, staring upward. Ron paused mid-chew, following her gaze. "What's not right? Looks normal to me." "It was clear 5 minutes ago. Now look." Harry tilted his head back. She was right. The enchanted sky had transformed with unsettling speed. Heavy grey clouds now churned across the ceiling, roiling and darkening as they watched. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop perceptibly, and several students near the doors pulled their robes tighter. "Blimey," Ron said. "That's moving fast." Professor Flitwick stood on his chair at the staff table, peering upward with interest. "Fascinating. The ceiling's responding beautifully. Must be quite a storm system moving in." As if in response, the first snowflakes appeared against the enchanted ceiling. Large, fat flakes that swirled in invisible winds. The younger students gasped and pointed. A Ravenclaw third year at the next table over leaned toward her friend. "I've never seen it change that quickly before." Hermione had already pulled out her wand, murmuring something under her breath. A moment later, she nodded with satisfaction. "Basic weather reveal charm. There's a genuine blizzard starting outside. The ceiling's not exaggerating. If anything, it's understating it." "How can you understate a blizzard?" Ron asked, loading more potatoes onto his plate with the air of someone determined to eat well before facing bad weather. "The ceiling shows the weather, but it can't quite capture the wind speed or the temperature. We're going to want to get back to the tower sooner rather than later." Harry glanced toward the towering windows. Already, snow was beginning to streak past them horizontally. The light outside had taken on that peculiar grey-white quality that came with heavy snowfall. "Think we should skip pudding?" Ron looked genuinely pained. "There's treacle tart." "We can ask the house elves for some later," Hermione said, standing and gathering her bag. "Come on. I'd rather not get caught in the corridors when this really hits." The great hall was beginning to buzz with weather-related chatter. Harry caught Professor McGonagall's eye as they headed for the doors, and she gave them a small nod of approval. Sensible students, heading back before the worst arrived. Percy Weasley was already on his feet, organizing the younger Gryffindors into a group. "First and second years with me," he announced importantly. "We'll be heading straight to the tower. No dawdling." The entrance hall was notably colder than the Great Hall, and when they pushed through the great oak doors to take the shortcut across the courtyard, the wind hit them like a physical force. Snow was already falling in earnest, swirling in wild patterns. "Forget the courtyard," Ron shouted over the wind. "Long way round." They ducked back inside and took the route through the castle's interior corridors instead. Other students had the same idea. The passages were more crowded than usual for this time of evening. Everyone seemed to be hurrying toward their common rooms, and there was an excited energy in the air. Bad weather at Hogwarts meant something different than it did in the outside world. Here, the castle's ancient magic interacted with the storms in ways that were fascinating if you were safely inside. A pair of Hufflepuff girls rushed past them, giggling. "Did you see the snow through the charms corridor windows? It's already piling up." The castle felt different as they climbed toward Gryffindor Tower. The stone walls seemed to radiate a deeper chill, and the torches in their brackets flickered more dramatically than usual. The windows they passed showed increasingly dramatic views of the storm. Snow building against the glass, the wind howling audibly even through the thick medieval panes. "The castle's sealing itself up," Hermione observed, pausing at one window. "Watch." As they stood there, frost began creeping across the glass in delicate patterns, forming crystalline designs that looked almost deliberate. The gaps around the window frame seemed to tighten, the stone itself shifting infinitesimally. "Hogwarts does that?" Harry asked. "Protection charms built into the foundation. The castle's been standing for over 1,000 years. It knows how to weather a storm. Literally." Hermione's voice carried that particular tone of academic delight that meant she'd read about this somewhere and was thrilled to see it in person. They climbed the stairs to the 7th floor, passing the occasional portrait, whose occupant had abandoned their frame, presumably seeking better shelter or more interesting views of the storm. Sir Cadogan's frame stood empty except for his fat pony, who looked unbothered by its master's absence. By the time they reached the portrait of the fat lady, snow was visible through every window, and the temperature had dropped enough that Harry could see his breath. The fat lady herself was wrapped in a painted shawl, looking distinctly disgruntled. "About time," she said as they approached. "The draft up here is dreadful, simply dreadful. In my day, they knew how to properly seal a corridor." "Sorry," Hermione said automatically. "We came as quickly as we could. The password still—" Yes, I know what the password is. You needn't remind me." The fat lady sniffed. "Fortuna Major, though why they couldn't have chosen something more elegant, I'll never know." The portrait swung open, and they climbed through into the blessed warmth of the Gryffindor common room. The fire was roaring, clearly tended recently by the house elves, and the scarlet and gold hangings seemed to glow in the flickering light. The circular room was crowded. It seemed most of Gryffindor had decided to spend the evening here, rather than in the library or their dormitories. The younger students had claimed the area closest to the fire and were already engaged in some complicated game involving exploding snap cards. Fred and George were in the corner by the window, pressing their faces against the glass and making exaggerated expressions of horror at the storm outside, much to the amusement of their immediate audience. "Oi, Harry," Fred called, spotting them. "Come look at this." They made their way over. The view from the tower was spectacular and slightly alarming. The snow was falling so heavily that the grounds below were barely visible, just a swirling mass of white. The wind drove the flakes nearly horizontal at times, and already there were significant drifts building against the castle walls. "Hasn't been a storm like this in years," George said cheerfully. "Not since our 2nd year, and that one didn't really get going until midnight. This is quality blizzard material, this is." "Classes might be cancelled tomorrow," Fred added hopefully. "Remember, George, that time in our 2nd year, McGonagall couldn't even get the doors to the Transfiguration corridor open because of the snow." "How does snow get inside the castle?" Harry asked. "Doesn't usually," Hermione said, "but in really severe storms, some of the older sections of the castle have gaps in the stones, and the courtyards can fill up, and then the snow sort of drifts into the connecting corridors. The house elves usually deal with it overnight." "Poor house elves," Ron said. "Going to be a busy night for them." They left Fred and George to their storm watching and found their favorite spot near the fireplace. 3 worn armchairs that had been claimed by generations of Gryffindors and had achieved the perfect level of comfortable shabbiness. Harry sank into his with relief. The chair seemed to wrap around him, and the heat from the fire was blissfully warm after the cold corridors. The common room had settled into a cozy evening atmosphere. The initial excitement of the storm was fading into contentment at being safely inside. Conversations hummed around them, discussions of homework, Quidditch, the latest gossip from other houses. A group of 7th years occupied one corner, clearly working on something complicated that involved a lot of parchment and heated debate about arithmancy equations. Percy emerged from the boys' staircase, looking flustered. "Has anyone seen my prefect notes? I had them at dinner, and now." "Probably ate them with your potatoes," Ron muttered, just quietly enough that Percy didn't hear. Hermione elbowed him, but she was smiling. The portrait hole opened again, and a rush of cold air announced the arrival of the last stragglers from dinner. Neville climbed through, looking windswept, despite having been inside the whole time. "The corridor outside is freezing," he announced to no one in particular. Nearly Headless Nick was complaining about it. Said even he could feel the cold, and he's been dead for 400 years. As if summoned by his name, the ghost drifted through the wall near the fireplace. Students nearest to his entry point shivered and shifted away slightly. Nick always brought a notable chill with him. "Quite the storm," Nick said conversationally, floating over to the window to peer out. His head wobbled precariously on his neck as he turned. "Reminds me of the winter of 1512. Now that was a blizzard. 3 weeks we were snowed in, the castle was. Had to resort to some very creative magic to keep the fires going." 3 weeks? A first-year girl squeaked from near the hearth. "Oh, don't worry, my dear. The house elves are much better organized these days, and the warming charms are more sophisticated. We'll all be quite comfortable." Nick floated higher, passing partially through a ceiling beam. "Still, might be wise to stay close to your common rooms for the next day or so. The castle does odd things in weather like this." "Odd things?" Harry asked. "The magic gets stirred up, you might say. Nothing dangerous, just unpredictable. Staircases might change more frequently than usual. Portraits get chatty. That sort of thing." Nick's transparent form began to fade. "I'm off to check on the other house ghosts. The Bloody Baron does tend to get rather morose in bad weather." He vanished through the floor, leaving a lingering chill. "Mental, isn't it?" Ron said, stretching his legs toward the fire. "That storms can affect magic." "Everything affects magic," Hermione said. "Weather, emotions, lunar phases, the age of the castle stones. Magic isn't separate from the world, it's woven through it. That's why places like Hogwarts feel so different from ordinary buildings. Centuries of magic, soaking into every stone." Harry listened to her explain, but his attention was drawn to movement near his feet. Crookshanks had appeared from somewhere, probably Hermione's dormitory, and was stalking across the carpet with clear purpose. The ginger cat's squashed face was fixed on the window where, despite the glass being closed, a few determined snowflakes had somehow found their way inside and were drifting lazily down. "Crookshanks, no," Hermione started, but the cat had already launched himself at a particularly large snowflake. His paw batted it out of the air with surprising accuracy. The snowflake disintegrated on contact, and Crookshanks landed with an expression of deep satisfaction. "How are snowflakes getting in?" Ron asked. "I thought you said the castle seals up." "It does, but the common rooms are warm, so there's always a bit of circulation. The fat lady probably has gaps around her frame. Plus, old castles breathe. In and out, very slightly. It's part of the magic." Hermione was already making a mental note to check this in the library tomorrow. Crookshanks settled near the fire, apparently on guard duty against any further snowflake incursions. His yellow eyes tracked every tiny white speck that dared to drift within sight. The common room continued to empty gradually as the evening wore on. Younger students were sent to bed by Percy, who was taking his prefect duties seriously now that Fred and George had left him alone. The seventh years eventually packed up their arithmancy debate and headed upstairs. Even Fred and George wandered off, probably to work on whatever experimental project they were currently developing. By 9 o'clock, the common room had quieted considerably. Perhaps 20 students remained, and most of those were absorbed in homework or quiet conversations. The storm outside had intensified. When Harry glanced toward the window, all he could see was white. The wind howled audibly even through the thick stone walls, a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Fancy a game?" Ron asked, producing his wizard's chess set from somewhere in the depths of his robes. The pieces were battered. This was the set that had been dropped downstairs, stepped on, and generally abused by years of Weasley ownership. But they were fiercely loyal to Ron and knew his playing style intimately. "You'll just beat me," Harry said, but he was already pulling his chair closer. "Probably," Ron agreed cheerfully, "but that's no reason not to play." As Ron set up the pieces, which grumbled good-naturedly at being deployed again, Harry felt something settle in his chest, a sense of peace that had been rare in his life, and especially rare since coming to Hogwarts. Here, in this moment, there was no Dark Lord to worry about, no mysteries to solve, no dangers lurking, just his two best friends, a warm fire, and a storm raging safely outside the castle walls. The White Queen Ron placed on the board, looked up at Harry and sniffed. "Try to put up a decent fight this time, would you?" Hermione laughed, summoning a blanket from somewhere and wrapping it around her shoulders. "I'll referee. Someone needs to make sure Ron doesn't cheat." "I never cheat." "You told your knight to trip Harry's bishop last time." "That's not cheating. That's creative strategy." Their bickering faded into the comfortable background noise of friendship. Outside, the blizzard strengthened, but inside Gryffindor Tower, surrounded by scarlet hangings and golden firelight, Harry Potter felt something he'd rarely experienced in his life. He felt like he was home. Ron's chess pieces arranged themselves with military precision, the White Queen tapping her foot impatiently while the Black King yawned. Harry had learned long ago that wizard's chess was an entirely different beast from the Muggle version. The pieces had opinions, strategies of their own, and a disturbing tendency to offer sarcastic commentary on one's tactical decisions. "Right then," Ron said, cracking his knuckles with the air of a seasoned general preparing for battle. "Your move, Harry." Harry pushed a pawn forward tentatively. The piece trudged to its new square with visible reluctance, glancing back as if already anticipating its doom. "Bit defensive, that," the White Queen remarked to Ron's Black Queen. "This'll be over quickly." Hermione had retrieved a thick book from her bag, something about the history of defensive charms, but kept glancing up to watch the game. She tried playing Ron once, lost spectacularly, and now preferred to observe. You could at least pretend Harry has a chance. Where's the fun in that? Ron moved his knight, which galloped across the board with enthusiasm. The fire crackled beside them, sending up the occasional shower of sparks. It was burning with the particular intensity that came from house elf tending, perfectly balanced between warmth and light, with none of the smoke that plagued ordinary fires. Harry had noticed this in his first year, but had never really stopped to appreciate it until now. The elves must have come through while they were at dinner, stoking every fire in Gryffindor Tower to perfection. A cold draught swept through the common room as the portrait hole swung open again. The fat lady's voice carried through. Hurry up, hurry up. You're letting all the warmth out. 3 fifth-year girls climbed through, their robes dusted with snow despite the relatively short walk from wherever they'd been. The tallest shook her head, sending water droplets flying. It's mad out there. The corridors near the astronomy tower are practically glacial. Should have stayed here, her friend replied, heading straight for the fire on the opposite side of the room. Professor Sinistra's, not even holding class tomorrow night, saw the notice on her door. Hermione's head snapped up from her book. She cancelled astronomy? The storm must be worse than I thought. She never cancels. Can't see the stars through a blizzard, Ron pointed out reasonably, capturing one of Harry's pawns. The piece was dragged off the board by Ron's bishop, protesting loudly. Even magical telescopes have limits. Harry tried to concentrate on the game, but his attention kept drifting. Through the window behind Ron's head, the snow swirled in hypnotic patterns. The glass had frosted over completely now, transforming the window into an abstract artwork of ice crystals. Occasionally, a gust of wind would rattle the frame, and the curtains, heavy velvet in Gryffindor scarlet, would ripple despite being closed. Harry, your turn. Ron waved a hand in front of his face. You planning to move sometime this century? Sorry. Harry studied the board, which looked increasingly dire from his perspective. Ron's pieces were advancing in coordinated formation, while his own scattered defenders tried desperately to mount a defense. He moved his bishop, hoping for the best. The bishop slid into position and immediately groaned. Oh, brilliant. Right in the firing line. Fantastic. True to the piece's prediction, Ron's next move sent a rook thundering across the board to smash Harry's bishop into surrender. The violence of wizard's chess had shocked Harry the first time he'd played, actual stone pieces destroying each other. But he'd grown accustomed to it. The pieces would reform for the next game after all, ready to throw themselves into battle again. You're not even trying? Ron accused, though he looked pleased. I'm trying. You're just too good. Finally, someone who appreciates my talents. Ron leaned back in his chair with exaggerated satisfaction. Hermione rolled her eyes but smiled. Your move, Harry. Try thinking more than one move ahead. I am thinking ahead. I'm thinking about how quickly Ron's going to checkmate me. A portrait on the wall, a wizard in elaborate Tudor-era robes, leaned forward in his frame. The boy's not wrong. Dreadful positioning. Reminds me of the time Lord Pemberton challenged Sir Barnaby to chess. Lost his entire left flank in 4 moves. Thank you, Harry said dryly. Very encouraging. Just offering historical perspective. the portrait sniffed, settling back. The common room had grown quieter as students continued trickling off to bed. Percy had given up on official prefect duties and was now ensconced in a corner with a stack of parchments, probably writing to Penelope Clearwater. The only other occupied area was near the opposite window, where a group of sixth years were playing some complicated card game that involved a lot of whispered strategy and occasional explosions of colored smoke. "I'm cold," Hermione announced, suddenly closing her book. "The fire's lovely, but with that wind," she pulled out her wand. "Finite incantatem on any existing warming charms then, cala totalis." A wave of warmth spread from her wand, but it felt thin, dissipating quickly in the large room. Hermione frowned. That should have been stronger. "The storm's probably interfering," Ron said, not looking up from the board where he was contemplating his next devastating move. "Magic gets wonky in extreme weather. Dad told me once that during a hurricane, their office's communication spells went completely haywire." "The castle's own magic is compensating," Hermione said thoughtfully, standing and moving closer to the stone wall. She pressed her hand against it. "Feel this." Harry and Ron exchanged glances, the universal look of friends who know they're about to receive an educational lecture, but both got up to join her. The moment Harry's palm touched the stone, he understood. The wall was warm, almost alive with ambient magic. "The heating charms are built into the foundation," Hermione explained, her voice taking on that enthusiastic quality that meant she'd found something fascinating. Rowena Ravenclaw's work, mostly, though all four founders contributed. The castle itself generates warmth in cold weather. It's not just spells. It's the stones remembering summer, the magic recycling the heat from hundreds of years of fires and human presence. "Mental," Ron said appreciatively. "So the castle's basically a giant hot water bottle." "That's a terrible analogy, but essentially, yes." They returned to their chairs, but now Harry noticed what Hermione meant. Despite the storm raging outside, despite the drafts around the windows, the common room maintained a comfortable temperature. Not perfectly warm. They'd need blankets eventually, but far better than should be possible in a medieval stone tower during a blizzard. "Check," Ron announced triumphantly. Again, Harry studied the board and sighed. His king had nowhere safe to move. "You could at least let me win occasionally. Where would be the learning in that?" Ron's grin was unrepentant. The portrait hole swung open once more, and this time house elves appeared. 3 of them, moving with the efficient silence that characterized their work. They carried trays laden with steaming mugs and small plates of biscuits. The lead elf, an elderly creature with enormous ears, bowed slightly. "Dobby is saying young masters and Miss will be wanting hot chocolate," the elf squeaked. "With the storm, Dobby is thinking warm drinks are needed." "Dobby!" Harry brightened. The elf had been working at Hogwarts for 2 years now, and while he'd calmed down considerably from his more manic days, he still showed particular attention to Harry's welfare. "Harry Potter, sir." Dobby's eyes shone. "Dobby is checking on all the common rooms, making sure fires are good and students are warm. This is being a very big storm." The other house elves distributed hot chocolate to the remaining students with practiced efficiency. Harry accepted his mug gratefully. The chocolate was perfect, rich and sweet, with just a hint of cinnamon. Real marshmallows floated on top. not the stale ones the Dursleys occasionally bore. This is brilliant, Dobby. Thank you. Dobby's ears flush pink with pleasure. Dobby is happy to help. Harry Potter and his friends are always so kind to Dobby. He glanced toward the fire, which had burned down slightly. With a snap of his fingers, the flames leaped higher, perfectly balanced again. There, much better. Is there being anything else Harry Potter needs? We're fine, really. You should get somewhere warm yourself. Oh, Dobby is not minding the cold. House Elves is being very hardy. But he looked pleased at the concern. Dobby will check back later. The storm is being a long one, the castle is saying. The three elves vanished with soft pops, leaving behind the scent of chocolate and the warm glow of the replenished fire. Harry sipped his drink and felt tension he hadn't realized he was carrying start to dissolve from his shoulders. Best job in the world, that, Ron said, dunking a biscuit into his hot chocolate. Being a house elf at Hogwarts, get to help people, do magic all day, work in a castle. They're unpaid laborers, Hermione said, but her tone was resigned rather than argumentative. They'd had this discussion many times. Though I'll admit, Dobby seems happy here. He is happy. He told me so. Said it's better than being with the Malfoys, obviously, but also that he likes having purpose. Harry moved his king out of immediate danger, buying himself perhaps 2 more turns. And before you start, he's also said he appreciates having choices, which he didn't before. Hermione nodded, satisfied. That's the important part. Choice. The 6th years finished their card game and headed upstairs, calling good nights. The common room felt larger now, more intimate somehow with fewer people. The portraits on the walls had settled into their evening routines, some sleeping, others engaged in quiet conversations with neighbors, occasionally drifting from frame to socialize. One portrait, a witch in medieval robes, paused in her journey across the wall to watch their chess game. That red-haired boy has quite the strategic mind. Wasted on chess, really. Should be planning military campaigns. I'll keep that in mind if we're ever invaded, Ron said, finally delivering checkmate. Harry's king threw down his tiny crown in disgust. I told you. Didn't I tell you? Hopeless. Rematch? Ron asked hopefully. Let me enjoy my hot chocolate first. Maybe learn something about chess strategy. Harry wrapped his hands around the warm mug. Through the window, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it had intensified. The wind's howl had become a constant background presence, punctuated by occasional shrieks when a particularly strong gust found its way through some gap in the castle's defenses. Crookshanks, who had been dozing by the fire, suddenly sat bolt upright, his yellow eyes fixed on something only he could see. A moment later, a snowflake drifted down from somewhere near the ceiling, apparently having infiltrated through some invisible gap, and began its lazy descent toward the floor. The cat moved with surprising speed for a creature of his bulk, launching himself at the snowflake. His paw caught it mid-air, and he landed with the grace of a much smaller feline, looking immensely proud of himself. Show off, Ron muttered, but he was grinning. Another snowflake appeared, then another. They drifted down through the warm air of the common room, like tiny invaders, and Crookshanks appointed himself their nemesis. He stalked from snowflake to snowflake, batting them out of existence with focused determination. He's going to be at this all night, Hermione observed, watching her cat with fond exasperation. Better than him attacking chess pieces, Harry said. Remember when he tried to eat Ron's bishop? That bishop had it coming, Hermione replied primly. It was being very rude about Crookshanks's appearance. They settled into comfortable silence, sipping their hot chocolate, while Ron set up the chess pieces for another game. The fire crackled steadily. The portraits murmured among themselves. Outside, the blizzard raged, transforming the world beyond the windows into abstract patterns of white and grey. And in the warm heart of Gryffindor Tower, 3 friends sat together, content in each other's company. Harry couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this peaceful. There was always something: threats, mysteries, homework, Quidditch practice, the constant low-level anxiety of knowing Voldemort was out there somewhere, growing stronger. But tonight, in this moment, those worries felt distant, manageable, almost unreal. Here, with Ron contemplating his opening move and Hermione absently petting Crookshanks as he returned victorious from another snowflake battle, Harry felt something he'd rarely experienced in his life. He felt safe. And more than that, he felt like he belonged. The common room clock, an ornate brass affair that had been donated by a wealthy Gryffindor's family sometime in the 1800s, chimed 10 with a melodious tone that seemed to acknowledge the lateness of the hour without actually demanding anyone go to bed. Harry had lost his second chess game, though he'd lasted longer this time, managing to capture 3 of Ron's pieces before inevitable defeat. "I'm getting better," Harry insisted, watching his defeated army reform on the board. "You are," Ron agreed, which was generous considering he'd still won in under 20 moves. "Your endgame's terrible, but your opening wasn't bad." "High praise indeed," Hermione murmured, not looking up from her book. She'd conjured additional blankets, proper thick woolen ones that smelled faintly of lavender, and had distributed them with the efficiency of a particularly bossy quartermaster. Now she was wrapped in 2, looking like a particularly studious caterpillar. The wind chose that moment to deliver a particularly vicious gust against the tower. The windows rattled in their frames, and everyone in the common room glanced up instinctively. Through the small gaps in the curtains, Harry could see the snow driving nearly horizontal, visible only as streaks of white against the darkness. "Merlin's beard," Ron breathed. "That's really coming down." One of the windows, the large one overlooking the grounds, had begun to frost over in earnest. But this wasn't ordinary frost. Harry stood for a better look, drawn by something unusual in the patterns forming on the glass. The ice crystals were arranging themselves in deliberate shapes, spirals and geometric patterns, interlocking designs that looked almost like runes. "Hermione, come look at this." She uncurled from her blanket cocoon and joined him. Her sharp intake of breath told him she saw it too. "That's not natural freezing. That's the castle's magic interacting with the storm." Ron peered over their shoulders. "Looks like writing almost. Can you read it?" "No, it's not actual runes. It's more like the castle's expressing something. Making art, maybe." Hermione pressed her hand to the glass, careful not to disturb the frost. "In really extreme weather, Hogwarts' protective enchantments become more visible. The magic has to work harder, so it shows itself." A portrait nearby, a stern-looking wizard with a pointed beard, cleared his throat. "Young lady is quite correct. I remember the winter of 1709. Coldest in recorded history, you know. The Great Hall's ceiling froze solid. Actual ice, mind you. not the enchanted version. The castle's warming charms created the most extraordinary patterns. Looked like frozen fireworks. What happened? Harry asked. The headmaster at the time, Dilys Derwent, marvelous woman, had to recruit every 7th year who could cast a decent flame charm. Took 3 days to thaw everything properly. The suits of armor developed icicles that didn't melt for months. The portrait chuckled at the memory. One of the Slytherin prefects got his tongue stuck to a knight's gauntlet. Had to wait for the matron to free him. Ron snickered. Bet that was embarrassing. Quite. The suits of armor still joke about it when they think no one's listening. The common room had emptied further while they'd been playing chess. Only 5 students remained besides themselves, a pair of 7th-year girls working on what looked like transfiguration homework, and 3 4th-year boys engaged in a complicated game involving gobstones and a lot of muttered counting. Percy emerged from the boys' dormitory, looking resigned. Right, it's past 10. Time for everyone except 7th years to head to bed. We're not tired, one of the 4th years protested. Nevertheless, it's the rules. Up you go. You can continue your game tomorrow. Percy's tone brooked no argument. He'd grown into his prefect role over the years, finding a balance between being officious and actually helpful. The younger students grumbled but complied, gathering their things and trudging toward the staircases. The 7th-year girls didn't move, technically within their rights to stay up, but they began packing up their homework anyway. We're going to bed too, one of them announced. Can barely keep our eyes open. This weather makes you drowsy. It's the air pressure, Hermione said automatically. Low-pressure systems affect brain chemistry. The girls smiled politely, the expression of people who'd learned not to encourage Hermione once she started on a scientific explanation, and disappeared up the stairs to the girls' dormitory. Percy surveyed the now nearly empty common room. You 3 staying up? For a bit, Harry said. We're not tired either. Percy looked like he wanted to argue but seemed to decide it wasn't worth it. Fine, but keep the noise down and make sure the fire's properly banked before you go to bed. Last thing we need is... We know, Percy, Ron interrupted. We'll be careful. Their brother nodded and retreated to his own dormitory, probably to write more letters or reorganize his prefect notes for the 1000th time. The portrait hole remained closed now, the fat lady having apparently retired to some interior room of her painted chambers. They could hear her snoring faintly from within the frame. Alone in the common room, except for the portraits, Harry felt the atmosphere shift. The space seemed larger somehow, more intimate. The firelight cast dancing shadows across the scarlet walls, and the storm outside had become a steady presence rather than an occasional intrusion, a constant low roar punctuated by sharper gusts. This is nice, Harry said, surprising himself by saying it aloud. Ron stretched his legs toward the fire. Yeah, no homework, no professors, no one needing us for anything. Just sitting. Don't speak too soon, Hermione said, but she was smiling. Knowing our luck, something will explode or attack, or mysteriously disappear. Not tonight, Harry said, with more confidence than he felt. Tonight, the most exciting thing happening is Crookshanks versus Snowflakes. The cat in question had settled near the hearth, apparently having declared victory over the frozen invaders. He was grooming himself with the self-satisfied air of a warrior returned from battle. Ron shifted in his chair, making himself more comfortable. You know what this reminds me of? Winter at the Burrow. Not the fancy bits, the Christmases and all that, but the boring nights when it's too cold to go outside and too early to sleep. Mum would make hot chocolate and we'd all pile into the living room. Fred and George would inevitably try to test some new invention. Percy would read and pretend he wasn't listening to us. Ginny would demand stories. What kind of stories? Hermione asked, closing her book and setting it aside. Clearly, she'd decided this was more interesting than reading. Ghost stories mostly. Dad's terrible at them. He tries to make them educational, brings in facts about ectoplasm and spiritual resonance. Mum's better. She knows this one, about a witch who haunted the moors near Ottery and Catchpole. Scared me senseless when I was 6. I can't imagine you scared, Harry said. Oh, I was terrified of loads of things when I was little. The ghoul in the attic mostly. Still am, a bit. That thing's genuinely disturbing. Ron grabbed another biscuit from the plate Dobby had left. What about you? The Dursleys do anything like this? Family nights? Harry snorted. The Dursleys did everything they could to avoid spending time together. Dudley would be in front of the telly. Vernon would be in his armchair reading the paper and complaining about everything. Petunia would be fussing in the kitchen, and I'd be in my cupboard, or later, my room, trying to be invisible. The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. Hermione's expression softened into something dangerously close to pity, which Harry hated. But you know what? He continued quickly. This is better. This, right here, is what I imagine family nights should be like. Comfortable, easy, no one trying to impress anyone or following some script of how you're supposed to act. We are your family, Hermione said quietly. You know that, right? You and Ron. You're the brothers I never had. Oi, I'm not your brother, Ron protested. That would make it weird when... He stopped abruptly, his ears turning red. When what? Hermione asked innocently, though her eyes glinted with amusement. Nothing, never mind. Point is, yeah, we're family. The important kind, the kind you choose. An awkward but pleasant silence fell. Harry stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. The heat was making him drowsy, but in a good way. The kind of sleepiness that came from contentment rather than exhaustion. The castle itself seemed to settle around them. The wind's howl had become almost soothing in its constancy. The portraits had mostly fallen silent, their occupants either asleep or engaged in their own quiet activities. One witch was knitting something that looked like a scarf, her needles clicking soundlessly in her painted world. Hermione, Ron said suddenly, tell us something interesting about the castle. Some bit of history we don't know. She brightened immediately. Nothing pleased Hermione more than being asked to share knowledge. Well, there's the matter of the house elves and the heating system. I was reading about it last month in Hogwarts. A history, the expanded edition, not the standard one we had to buy in first year. There's an expanded edition? Harry asked. 4 volumes. The library has them in the restricted section because they contain more detailed information about the castle's defenses and internal workings. Anyway, the heating charms aren't just enchantments placed on the stones. The founders, primarily Ravenclaw, as I mentioned, created a network of magical conduits running through the castle's walls. Think of them like blood vessels, but for magic instead of blood. That's slightly disturbing, Ron observed. It's brilliant, Hermione corrected. The conduits draw ambient magic from the castle's inhabitants. Students, professors, even ghosts contribute tiny amounts and channel it into practical applications: heating, lighting, the moving staircases, the protective wards. Hogwarts is essentially a living magical ecosystem. So we're all powering the castle just by being here. Harry tried to wrap his mind around the concept. Exactly. That's why Hogwarts feels different during summer, when most students are gone. The magic becomes dormant, waiting. And it's why the castle can do extraordinary things when needed, like tonight, strengthening its defenses against the storm. It's responding to our need for warmth and safety. Ron looked around the common room with new appreciation. So the castle's protecting us right now, actively. It always is. But yes, especially now. It's working much harder than usual. Hermione pulled her blanket tighter. I find that comforting, actually. The idea that Hogwarts wants to keep us safe. A log in the fireplace shifted, sending up a shower of sparks. Crookshanks opened one eye, deemed the disturbance unworthy of concern, and went back to sleep. My turn for a story, Harry said, though he wasn't sure where the impulse came from. Not about the Dursleys, obviously, but do you remember our first year? That first night in this common room? How could I forget? Ron said. I was terrified someone would realize I didn't belong here, that they'd figure out I was just a youngest son with hand-me-down everything, not a real wizard. I thought everyone could tell I'd been raised by muggles, Harry admitted, that I'd do something completely wrong and embarrass myself. And Hermione, I was insufferable, Hermione finished. I know. I was so nervous, I'd hidden it behind knowing everything. Thought if I could answer every question, prove I'd read every book, no one would notice I had no idea how to actually fit in. And now look at us, Ron said. 3 years later, still sitting in the same common room, still worrying about different things, but together. Together, Harry echoed. The word felt significant somehow, weighted with everything they'd been through. The challenges, the dangers, the triumphs, the troll in the bathroom, the chamber of secrets, the Dementors and Sirius and Pettigrew, and everything that had happened last year. Nearly headless, Nick chose that moment to drift through the wall, his silvery form more translucent than usual. Still awake, you three? It must be nearly 11. Just talking, Hermione said. How are the corridors? Freezing, even by my standards. The suits of armor are complaining bitterly, and the staircases are being even more temperamental than usual. One of them has decided to simply stop moving altogether until the weather improves. Nick floated closer to the fire, though, of course, he couldn't feel its warmth. But the castle's holding up magnificently. Not like that dreadful winter of 1615, when the entire East Wing lost power and they had to evacuate to Hogsmeade for 3 days. That happened? Ron looked alarmed. Oh yes, before the magical conduit system was fully developed. Just temporary enchantments back then. They failed in extreme conditions. Nick's head wobbled as he shook it. Modern students don't appreciate how much better things are now. Why, in my day, a particularly violent gust of wind shook the windows, cutting off Nick's reminiscence. The frost patterns on the glass shifted, rearranging themselves into new configurations. For a moment, Harry could have sworn they formed the shape of a lion, Gryffindor's symbol, before dissolving back into abstract spirals. Did you see that? He asked. The lion. Hermione nodded. The castle's showing its house pride. It does that sometimes, apparently. subtle little displays of identity. Nick smiled, an eerie expression on a translucent face. Hogwarts has always had a flair for the dramatic. Well, I'll leave you young people to your evening. Try to get some sleep eventually. Tomorrow may bring snow days, but it will also bring hungry students wanting breakfast, and the house elves will need all the help the castle can provide. He drifted back through the wall, leaving them alone once more. The fire crackled, the wind howled, and three friends sat together in the warm heart of Gryffindor Tower, surrounded by centuries of magic and history, feeling, perhaps for the first time in a long while, completely at peace. The brass clock struck midnight with 12 gentle chimes that seemed to resonate through the common room's warm air. Harry had been drifting in that pleasant state between wakefulness and sleep, lulled by the fire's warmth and the storm's steady rhythm. The sound brought him back to full awareness. Midnight already? Ron yawned, stretching. Feels like we just sat down. That's what happens when you're comfortable, Hermione said, though she too looked startled by how quickly the time had passed. She'd abandoned her book entirely an hour ago, content to simply sit and watch the fire while the three of them talked about everything and nothing: Quidditch, strategies, theories about their upcoming exams, Ron's ongoing complaints about Percy's increasing pomposity. The common room was entirely theirs now. Even the portraits had mostly settled into sleep, though a few remained awake, the insomniacs of the painted world, keeping their own midnight vigils. The seventh-year witch who'd been knitting had finished her scarf and started on what looked like a matching hat. Harry stood and moved to the window, drawn by a change in the storm's quality. The wind had shifted somehow, its howl taking on a different pitch. He pulled back the heavy curtain carefully, and what he saw made him catch his breath. "Come look at this." Ron and Hermione joined him, pressing close to the frosted glass. Beyond the window, the world had transformed into something from a fairy tale. The snow was still falling, if anything, more heavily than before, but the wind had changed direction, creating massive swirling patterns visible even in the darkness. The castle's grounds were buried under what must have been several feet of snow, the familiar landmarks rendered unrecognizable under white blankets. But it was the sky that held Harry's attention. Through gaps in the clouds, he could see stars, impossibly bright against the black sky, and the snow itself seemed to glow faintly, as though each flake carried its own tiny light. The entire scene pulsed with a subtle luminescence that had nothing to do with moonlight. "That's not normal," Ron said unnecessarily. Hermione's face was pressed against the glass, her breath fogging it. "It's the castle's magic. It's so strong right now. Can't you feel it? The storm's pulled something out of Hogwarts' foundations. Old magic, the kind that doesn't usually show itself." Harry could feel it. The air itself seemed charged, almost electric. The hairs on his arms stood up, and he felt a tingling sensation in his fingertips. It wasn't threatening, quite the opposite. It felt like the castle was stretching, flexing muscles it rarely used, responding to the storm with a display of its own power. "Look at the forest," Hermione whispered. The forbidden forest was barely visible through the snow, but what they could see was extraordinary. The trees seemed to glow from within, a faint greenish light emanating from their trunks and branches. Harry had spent enough time near the forest to know this wasn't normal. Even the magical creatures that lived there didn't create this kind of illumination. "The trees are old," Hermione said, her voice taking on that lecturing quality that meant she was working through something as she spoke. "Some of them are ancient, older than the castle, older than the founders. They have their own magic, separate from Hogwarts, but connected to it. The storm must be affecting them too." A movement caught Harry's eye, something large moving through the forest, visible only as a darker shadow against the glowing trees. Then another shape, and another. "What are those?" "Centaurs, maybe," Ron suggested. "Or thestrals. They're out in this." "They live in the forest," Hermione reminded him. "This is their home. They're probably more comfortable in this weather than we would be." As they watched, one of the shapes moved closer to the forest's edge, becoming more distinct. It was indeed a centaur, a massive figure with a bow slung across his back. He paused at the tree line, seeming to survey the castle. For a moment, Harry felt certain the centaur was looking directly at their window, though that was impossible at this distance. Then the figure turned and disappeared back into the glowing forest. "They're watching the storm too," Harry said. "Even they think it's special." The wind gusted again, and this time Harry noticed something he'd missed before. One of the windows, a smaller one set into the wall beside the main window, was slightly ajar. Just a crack, barely noticeable, but enough for snowflakes to drift through. That explained how Crookshanks had been finding his targets earlier. "Should we close it?" Ron asked. Hermione considered, then shook her head. "Leave it. The castle opened it for a reason, probably to equalize pressure or allow some circulation. The magic knows what it's doing." More snowflakes drifted through the gap, swirling in the warm air currents before melting. But these flakes seemed different from the ones earlier. They moved with purpose, forming patterns as they fell, spirals and loops that looked almost choreographed. "Is the snow dancing?" Ron sounded uncertain, as if questioning his own sanity. "The castle's playing," Hermione said, with wonder in her voice. "It's been doing serious work all night, maintaining temperature, reinforcing walls, protecting everyone inside. Now it's playing. Magic does that sometimes when there's excess energy. It creates beauty for its own sake." They stood mesmerized, watching the snowflakes perform their aerial ballet. Crookshanks had noticed too. The cat sat up, his yellow eyes tracking the flakes with intense focus. But he didn't pounce. Even he seemed to recognize that these weren't prey. They were something else entirely. A sound from behind made them turn. One of the portraits, an old wizard Harry had never seen awake before, had stirred in his frame. He peered at them with rheumy eyes. "You children see it too, then," he said, his voice cracked with age. The castle's true face. "Sir?" Hermione stepped closer to the portrait. "Happens once in a great while. Storm like this, old magic stirring. Not dangerous, mind you. Just honest. Hogwarts showing what it really is beneath all the lessons and rules and daily business. Raw magic, ancient and wild and beautiful." The wizard smiled. "I saw it once when I was a student. Winter of 1403. Never forgot it." "What happened?" Harry asked. "Nothing dramatic. No great revelation or adventure. Just a night when the castle let us see its soul. Made me understand why the founders chose this place, this particular hill, these specific stones. The magic was already here, you see. They just gave it purpose." The wizard's eyes drifted closed. "Watch it while you can. Moments like these are rarer than phoenix tears." He settled back into sleep, leaving the three of them staring at each other. 1403, Ron said. That's over 500 years ago, and he remembers it like it was yesterday. Portraits remember everything, Hermione said softly. Every detail, perfectly preserved. Imagine carrying a memory like that for centuries. Harry turned back to the window. The snow continued its performance. And now he noticed other things. The way the firelight in the common room seemed to pulse in rhythm with the storm. The manner in which the curtains swayed despite there being no draft to move them. The subtle vibration in the floor beneath their feet, as if the castle itself was humming. "We should go out there," Ron said suddenly. "What? Out in the storm?" Hermione looked at him as if he'd suggested flying to the moon. "Not out, just to another window, a better view. The astronomy tower, maybe, or—" "The astronomy tower's locked at night," Hermione said automatically. "And it's freezing in the corridors. Nick said the staircases are being difficult. We could get stuck somewhere." But Harry could see she was tempted. He was too. The idea of seeing this phenomenon from a different vantage point was compelling. "What about the North Tower? There are those big windows on the landing. We wouldn't have to go outside, just up a few flights of stairs." "It's after midnight," Hermione protested, but her tone was wavering. "If we get caught, who's going to catch us? Filch will be in his office staying warm. The professors are all in their quarters. The ghosts are doing their own rounds." Ron was already moving toward the portrait, whole. "Come on, when are we going to get another chance like this?" Hermione looked at Harry, who shrugged. "It would be nice to see more of it, and we're not exactly breaking into the restricted section or anything, just going to look out a window." "Fine," Hermione sighed, but she was smiling. "But we're taking the Marauder's map, and if we see anyone coming, we head straight back." They gathered their things quickly. Harry retrieved the map from his dormitory. Ron grabbed a couple of the blankets in case they needed extra warmth, and Hermione filled her pockets with the remaining biscuits from Dobby's tray. Crookshanks watched their preparations with interest, but made no move to follow. He'd apparently decided the common room fire was preferable to adventure. The fat lady was deeply asleep when they reached the portrait hole, snoring loudly enough that the sound echoed through her frame. Harry pushed it open as quietly as possible, and they slipped through into the corridor beyond. The temperature difference was immediate and shocking. Where the common room had been toasty warm, the corridor was frigid, not quite freezing, but cold enough that their breath misted in front of their faces. The torches along the walls burned with a strange blue-tinged flame, and frost had crept up the stone walls in delicate patterns. "Merlin's frozen beard," Ron muttered, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. Nick wasn't kidding about the cold. Harry unfolded the Marauder's map, tapping it with his wand. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The familiar ink lines spread across the parchment, revealing Hogwarts in miniature. He scanned quickly for signs of authority figures. Filch was indeed in his office, a tiny dot labelled Argus Filch, sitting motionless. Mrs. Norris prowled the dungeons. They'd want to avoid that area. Most of the professors showed as stationary dots in their respective quarters. Dumbledore appeared to be in his office, which wasn't unusual. The headmaster kept irregular hours. "Coast is clear," Harry reported. "North Tower's this way." They moved through the corridors with practiced stealth, a skill honed over 3 years of various nighttime adventures. The castle felt different at this hour, especially with a storm raging outside. Every shadow seemed deeper, every sound amplified. The wind's howl was audible even through the thick walls, and occasionally they'd pass a window where snow had somehow infiltrated, creating small drifts on the stone floor. The suits of armor they passed were indeed complaining, though they fell silent as the students approached. Harry heard one mutter, "Never saw weather like this in my day," before going quiet. They climbed a staircase, thankfully one that was cooperating and staying put, and emerged onto a broader corridor lined with tall windows. Through them, the storm was even more spectacular than it had appeared from Gryffindor Tower. Here, they could see across the castle's various roofs and towers, could observe how the snow had transformed every surface. But it was the North Tower landing that took Harry's breath away. The space was circular, with windows on all sides offering a 360-degree view. Moonlight, for the clouds had broken apart more than Harry had realized, poured through the glass, illuminating the landing in silver light. "Oh," Hermione breathed. The view was magnificent. To the east, they could see the lake, its surface frozen and covered in snow, reflecting the starlight like a massive mirror. To the north, the forbidden forest glowed with that strange inner light, looking like something from a dream. To the west, the mountains that surrounded the valley rose like ancient guardians, their peaks lost in clouds. And to the south, they could see Hogsmeade in the distance, tiny lights twinkling through the snow. But most extraordinary was the snow itself. From this height, they could see the patterns it made, vast spiraling formations that covered acres, geometric designs that couldn't possibly be random, flowing shapes that looked almost like writing in some unknown language. "The castle's not just protecting itself," Hermione said, her voice filled with awe. "It's creating. It's making art with the snow." Ron pointed. "Look at that. Is that the Gryffindor lion?" He was right. In the snow on the grounds below, barely visible but definitely present, was the outline of a massive lion, and near it, other shapes, an eagle, a badger, a serpent, the 4 house symbols drawn in snow and shadow. "Hogwarts is celebrating itself," Harry said quietly, "showing what it is, what it stands for." They stood together at the windows, blankets wrapped around their shoulders, watching magic work in ways they'd never imagined. And Harry felt a connection to the castle deeper than ever before, a sense that Hogwarts wasn't just a building or even an enchanted structure. It was alive in ways he was only beginning to understand, and tonight it had chosen to share its true nature with anyone willing to look. "We should remember this," Hermione whispered. "Every detail. This is the kind of magic they don't teach in classes." Harry nodded, committing it all to memory. The glowing forest, the dancing snow, the symbols on the grounds, the feeling of standing in this tower while ancient magic played around them. This was Hogwarts at its most honest, its most pure. This was home. They stayed at the North Tower windows for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, watching the castle's magic paint patterns across the winter landscape. Eventually, the cold became too much even with the blankets, and Ron's teeth started chattering loudly enough to echo in the circular chamber. "We should head back," Hermione said reluctantly, pulling her blanket tighter, "before we freeze solid and become part of the castle's decorations." Harry checked the Marauder's map one more time. Filch had moved from his office and was now patrolling the third floor, nowhere near their route back to Gryffindor Tower. Mrs. Norris remained in the dungeons. They were safe. The journey back felt different from the journey out. Perhaps it was because they'd seen what the castle was capable of. Or perhaps it was simply that the night had deepened, but the corridors seemed more alive. The portraits they passed weren't sleeping anymore. Most were awake, standing in their frames and looking toward the windows, as if they too could sense something special happening. An old witch in a Renaissance-era gown nodded to them as they passed. "Beautiful night for it," she said cryptically. "For what?" Ron asked, but she had already turned away, gazing out a painted window in her frame that showed a snowstorm of her own. They were halfway back to Gryffindor Tower when Harry noticed something odd. The portraits lining this particular corridor, a gallery of former Hogwarts students from the 1700s, according to the small plaques beneath each frame, were all clustered together, engaged in what looked like an urgent discussion. As the trio approached, the portraits fell silent, watching them with unusual intensity. "Excuse me," Hermione said, never one to pass up an opportunity for information. "Is something wrong?" A young man in a powdered wig looked at his companions, then back at the students. "Wrong? No, nothing wrong. Quite the opposite. We were just discussing whether to tell someone about the founders." Harry's attention sharpened. "The founders? What about them?" "Their portraits," an elderly woman in the next frame said, leaning forward eagerly. During storms like this, when the old magic rises, their portraits become more present, more aware. They usually hang in the staff wing where students can't access them, but on nights like this, they sometimes appear in other frames throughout the castle. "Where?" Hermione's eyes were bright with interest. The portraits exchanged glances again, clearly debating amongst themselves. Finally, the young man spoke. "The corridor behind the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy. There's a stretch of wall there with empty frames. Preparation for future headmasters, you understand. The founders sometimes visit those frames during significant magical events. They like to observe." "But we can't go there," Hermione said, though she sounded disappointed. "That's in the staff wing. We'd definitely get caught." "Actually," Ron said, studying the map more carefully, "it's not technically the staff wing. It's sort of between the staff wing and the regular corridors. And according to this, there's no one in that area right now." Harry felt a pull of curiosity. He couldn't quite explain. The idea of seeing the founders, or at least their portrait representations, was compelling in a way that went beyond simple interest. These were the people who'd built Hogwarts, who'd laid the foundations for everything the castle had become. On a night when the castle itself was revealing its true nature, encountering them felt almost meant to be. "We shouldn't," Hermione said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're already out after hours," Ron pointed out. "Already breaking curfew. Might as well make it worthwhile." "That's terrible logic," Hermione said, but she was already moving in the direction of Barnabas the Balmy's tapestry. The corridor they sought was one Harry had passed dozens of times without really noticing. The tapestry showed Barnabas attempting to train trolls for the ballet, a comical image that usually drew chuckles from passing students. Behind it, accessible through a small door, was a narrow passageway that connected to a lesser-used section of the castle. They slipped through and found themselves in a quieter corridor. this one lined with portraits in various states of occupancy. Some held sleeping figures, others were empty, and a few showed scenes of Hogwarts from different eras rather than individual people. And there, in 4 frames that Harry was certain had been empty every other time he'd passed by, were the founders. He recognized them immediately from the school's various depictions and the Sorting Hat songs. Godric Gryffindor stood tall in his frame, his ruby-encrusted sword visible at his hip, his expression one of watchful alertness. Helga Hufflepuff sat in a comfortable chair, a cup in her hands, her round face kind, but her eyes sharp. Rowena Ravenclawson stood beside a desk covered in books and instruments, her diadem glinting on her brow. And Salazar Slytherin leaned against a stone wall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. They were more vivid than any portraits Harry had seen, almost real, as if they might step out of their frames at any moment. And all 4 were watching the students with undisguised interest. "Well," Gryffindor said, his voice resonating with warmth and authority. "Students abroad at midnight during a magnificent storm. That shows proper spirit." "Or improper judgment," Slytherin murmured, though there was a hint of amusement in his tone. "They came to see us," Hufflepuff said gently. "That shows curiosity and respect for history. Hello, young ones. Don't be frightened. We're only portraits after all, echoes of people long dead." Hermione had gone very still, her expression one of awe. Ron looked slightly terrified. Harry found his voice first. "We heard you might appear tonight because of the storm. The castle remembers us more clearly when its magic is strong," Ravenclaw explained, setting down the instrument she'd been examining. "We exist in these frames always, but usually only as faint impressions. Tonight, we're as close to our living selves as portraits can be. It's a rare gift." "You're watching the storm?" Harry asked. "We're watching everything," Gryffindor said. "The castle is our legacy, our greatest achievement. When it flexes its power like this, how could we not observe? The snow patterns on the grounds," Hermione said, her voice slightly shaky. "The house symbols, did you create those?" "The castle did," Hufflepuff corrected gently. "We 4 poured our essences into Hogwarts when we built it. Our values, our magic, our very souls in some ways. The castle remembers. Tonight, it's honoring that memory." Slytherin shifted, his painted robes rustling with surprising realism. "You're wondering why we're speaking with you, why we've revealed ourselves." It wasn't a question, but Harry nodded anyway. "Because you represent what we hoped for," Ravenclaw said. "When we created the house system, we knew it would create divisions. We accepted that as necessary. Students need identity, need to belong to something smaller than the whole. But we also hoped that friendships would cross those boundaries, that courage and cunning and wisdom and loyalty might learn from each other." She looked directly at the 3 of them. "A Gryffindor, a Gryffindor, and a Gryffindor," she said with a slight smile. "But I see Ravenclaw's thirst for knowledge in one of you, and Hufflepuff's loyalty binds all 3 together, and there's certainly cunning in wandering the castle at midnight. You're more than your house, and that's exactly as it should be." "The hat wanted to put me in Slytherin," Harry blurted out, then immediately wished he hadn't. But Slytherin simply nodded. "Of course it did. You have the qualities I valued. Ambition, resourcefulness, a certain disregard for rules when they conflict with what you believe is right. The hat sees truly. But you chose Gryffindor, and that choice matters more than any innate quality. We built that into the castle's magic deliberately. Choice over destiny, always. Even you, Ron asked, finding his voice. I thought Slytherin House was all about pure blood and I was, Slytherin said calmly. In life, I had my prejudices and my fears. I believed magical blood should be protected, preserved. I was wrong about many things. Death has a way of providing clarity. The portrait that remains carries my knowledge and certain aspects of my personality. But centuries of observation have educated me. My house has produced heroes and villains, as has every house. Blood matters far less than I believed. The castle has been teaching us, Gryffindor added. We portraits learn from what we observe. 1,000 years of students passing through these halls, proving again and again that courage comes in many forms, that wisdom and cunning and loyalty aren't bound by bloodline or background. We were founders, not prophets. We made mistakes. Hufflepuff set down her cup. What we're trying to say, perhaps rather clumsily, is that we're proud of what Hogwarts has become. Proud of students like you who see past the boundaries we created and find friendship based on who you are, rather than which house you're in. That's the truest magic. Harry felt something tight in his chest loosening. He'd never quite articulated it, even to himself. But there had always been a small worry that being nearly sorted into Slytherin meant something dark about his nature. Hearing one of the founders, the founder whose house he'd feared, say that choice mattered more than destiny felt like absolution. The storm's beginning to ease, Ravenclaw observed, glancing toward a window visible in her frame's background. Soon we'll fade back to our usual states, present but not present, aware but distant. We have time for one more exchange, I think. Is there anything you wish to ask us? Hermione's hand shot up automatically. Then she blushed and lowered it. Sorry. Habit. There are so many things I want to know. About the castle's construction, about the magic you used, Ask one question, Ravenclaw said kindly. Make it count. Hermione thought for a moment, then asked, What's the most important thing you learned from building Hogwarts? The one lesson you'd want students to know. The four founders looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Gryffindor spoke for all of them. That safety and growth require the same thing, a foundation strong enough to support you while you reach for something higher. We built these walls thick not to imprison students, but to give them a place secure enough that they could dare to learn, to fail, to discover who they might become. Hogwarts is shelter and challenge both. Never forget that you're safe here, but also never become so comfortable that you stop growing. The storm will pass, Hufflepuff added softly. They always do. But the warmth you found tonight, friendship, belonging, the comfort of being truly seen and accepted, that's what endures. Hold on to each other. That's the magic that outlasts even castle stones. Ron shifted uncomfortably, clearly moved but unsure how to express it. Thanks. For everything, I guess. For building this place. For giving us a home, Harry added quietly. You give it life, Slytherin said. We laid stones and cast spells. You and thousands like you over the centuries. You made it matter. We should thank you. Ravenclaw had been right about the storm. Even in the few minutes they'd been talking, Harry could sense a change in the air. The electric quality was fading. the hum in the floor beneath them growing quieter. The castle's magic was settling back to its normal state, the extraordinary moment passing. The portraits themselves were changing too, becoming slightly less vivid, slightly more like ordinary painted figures. The founders noticed as well. "Time for you to return to your house," Gryffindor said. "Sleep well, young lions. You've witnessed something special tonight." "Will you remember this?" Hermione asked urgently. "Tomorrow, when the magic's normal again, will you remember talking to us?" "We'll remember," Ravenclaw assured her, "though we'll be distant again, less able to interact. But the memory will remain, as I hope will yours." "Always," Harry said. The four founders smiled, even Slytherin, his expression warm in a way that transformed his severe features. Then, as the three students watched, the portraits began to fade, not disappearing entirely, but becoming less present, less real. Within moments, they looked like any other portraits in the castle, beautiful and well painted, but undeniably just paint and canvas. "Did that really just happen?" Ron asked in a whisper. "Yes," Hermione said, firmly. "Yes, it did. I'm going to remember every word." They stood for another moment in the quiet corridor, reluctant to leave. Then the Marauders' map showed Filch beginning to move toward their general area, and pragmatism overcame reverence. "Run," Ron suggested. "Briskly walk," Hermione corrected. "Running looks suspicious." They made it back to Gryffindor Tower without incident, the fat lady grumbling as she swung open to admit them. The common room welcomed them back with warmth and firelight, exactly as they'd left it. Crookshanks hadn't moved from his spot by the hearth. Harry sank into his chair, feeling exhausted in the best possible way. His mind was full of everything they'd seen: the glowing forest, the snow patterns, the founders themselves. It felt like a dream, but the cold still lingering in his bones proved it had been real. "That was incredible," Ron said, stating the obvious because someone had to. "We can never tell anyone," Hermione said practically. "They'd never believe us anyway." "I don't need anyone else to believe it," Harry said. "I know it happened. We know it happened. That's enough." The fire crackled its agreement, and outside the storm continued its slow retreat, having shared its secrets with those willing to venture out and discover them. Harry woke with a start, momentarily disoriented. He wasn't in his four-poster bed. That much was immediately clear. His neck ached from an awkward angle, and something heavy was draped across his legs. As consciousness returned fully, he realized he was still in the common room armchair, wrapped in one of the blankets Hermione had conjured. Grey light filtered through the windows, dim but unmistakable. Dawn was breaking. He sat up carefully, trying not to disturb the others. Ron was sprawled in the chair beside him, snoring softly, his head tilted back at an angle that would definitely cause neck pain later. Hermione had curled up in her chair like a cat, her bushy hair even more disheveled than usual, one hand still clutching her book, though she'd clearly fallen asleep hours ago. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing faintly red in the hearth. Crookshanks remained on the hearthrug, now stretched out in a patch of warmth, looking supremely comfortable. The common room felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, peaceful in a way it never was during the day when filled with students and activity. Harry stood slowly, his muscles stiff from sleeping in the chair. He moved to the window, drawn by the changing quality of light. The curtains had fallen partially closed during the night, and he pulled them back fully. What he saw took his breath away. The storm had passed. The sky was clearing from east to west, bands of grey cloud giving way to pale blue. The sun hadn't yet risen above the mountains, but its approach was evident in the golden light spreading across the horizon. And the world the storm had left behind was transformed. Snow covered everything, deep, pristine, untouched. The castle grounds looked like a painting, all the familiar features softened and reimagined. The forbidden forest stood silent at the edge of visibility, its branches heavy with snow. The lake was a flat expanse of white, its frozen surface buried. Even the castle's own architecture had changed, every ledge and tower and wall now decorated with elaborate snow formations. But it was the quality of the light that mesmerized Harry. As the sun climbed toward the horizon, its rays caught the snow and transformed it into something magical, quite literally. The snow sparkled with more than just reflected light. There was magic in it still, the remnants of the castle's nighttime display. Each snowflake seemed to hold a tiny star, creating a glittering landscape that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. The house symbols they'd seen from the North Tower were still visible on the grounds, though softened by additional snowfall. The Gryffindor lion was directly below their window, and as the sunlight touched it, the snow seemed to glow briefly with a warm red-gold light before fading back to white. Merlin's beard. Ron's voice came from behind him, thick with sleep. That's beautiful. Harry turned to see his friend standing, stretching with audible pops from his spine, blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cape. Ron joined him at the window, and they stood together watching the sunrise paint the snow in shades of gold and pink and pale blue. We fell asleep, Harry said unnecessarily. Yeah, must have been after we got back from seeing the founders. Ron rubbed his eyes. That really happened, right? We didn't dream it. It happened. Harry was certain of that, even if the memory had taken on a dreamlike quality. Look, the patterns on the grounds are still there. The castle was definitely doing something unusual last night. Hermione stirred in her chair, making a small sound of protest as consciousness returned. She sat up, immediately reaching for her hair in a futile attempt to tame it. What time is it? Early, Ron said. Sun's not even up yet. She joined them at the window, and her expression shifted from sleepy confusion to wonder. Oh, that's extraordinary. They stood in a row, 3 friends wrapped in blankets, watching the sun rise over the transformed landscape. Harry felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. This moment, this view, these people beside him, it was perfect in a way that had nothing to do with magic spells or dramatic events. I'm glad we stayed up, Hermione said quietly. I'm glad we saw all of it. Even breaking curfew? Ron teased gently. Even that. Some rules are worth breaking for the right reasons. She paused. Don't ever tell Percy I said that. Harry laughed, the sound seeming too loud in the quiet room, but feeling good nonetheless. Your secret's safe with us. The sun continued its climb, and as full daylight approached, they could see more details of the storm's aftermath. The snow had drifted against the castle walls in some places to heights of 10 feet or more. The paths that normally crisscrossed the grounds had vanished entirely. Even the bridge to the stone circle was invisible beneath a smooth blanket of white. Classes are definitely cancelled, Ron observed with satisfaction. No way anyone's getting to the greenhouses or Hagrid's hut through that. McGonagall will make an announcement at breakfast, Hermione predicted. Assuming the house elves can manage breakfast, the kitchens might be affected. As if summoned by the mention, a soft pop announced the arrival of a house elf. Not Dobby this time, but an elderly elf with enormous droopy ears. She carried a tray laden with tea things and what looked like fresh scones. "Good morning, young masters and miss," she squeaked, setting the tray on the table near their chairs. "Nipsey is bringing breakfast for the early risers. The kitchens are working extra hard today. Much snow to deal with, many students to feed." "Thank you, Nipsey," Hermione said warmly. "Is everything all right? The storm didn't damage the kitchens?" "Oh no, miss. The kitchens are deep inside the castle, very safe. But Nipsey and the others must clear snow from the entrances, must make sure all the fires stay burning strong, must prepare for many hungry students who will want hot food after such a cold night." The elf looked pleased rather than burdened by the work. "It is good to be needed." She popped away before they could respond, leaving them with steaming tea and warm scones that smelled of butter and honey. Harry's stomach reminded him forcefully that he hadn't eaten since the hot chocolate and biscuits many hours ago. They settled back into their chairs with their breakfast, the warming tea helping chase away the last of the night's chill. The common room remained empty except for them. Apparently, no other Gryffindors had decided to wake at dawn to watch the sunrise. "We should probably clean up," Hermione said, looking around at the evidence of their long night. "Before everyone else wakes up, the blankets, the chess set, all these mugs." "In a minute," Ron said through a mouthful of scone. "Let's just sit for a bit longer." Harry understood. There was something precious about this quiet moment, this space between the extraordinary night and the ordinary day that would follow. Once other students woke up, once the common room filled with chatter and activity, this particular magic would fade. Not the memory of what they'd witnessed, that would remain, but this feeling of suspended time, of being wrapped in their own private bubble. The portrait hole swung open, startling all three of them. Nearly headless Nick drifted through, looking unusually substantial in the early light. Ghosts were always more visible at dawn and dusk, Harry had learned. Something about the quality of light making them easier to see. "Ah, the midnight wanderers are awake," Nick said cheerfully. "Or perhaps you never went to sleep." "We dozed off down here," Harry admitted. "What brings you by so early?" "Checking on the state of things after the storm. Quite a night. The Grey Lady says it was the strongest magical surge she's felt in decades." The Bloody Baron actually smiled. Briefly, mind you, but still. A historic moment. Nick floated closer to the window. Beautiful morning after a wild night. That's often the way of it. "Nick," Hermione said carefully, "the founders' portraits, do they often become more present during magical events like last night?" The ghost's eyebrows rose. "The founders? My dear girl, those portraits rarely animate at all. I've been at Hogwarts for over 500 years, and I've only seen them truly conscious perhaps 3 times. Why do you ask?" "No reason," Hermione said quickly. "Just curious." Nick studied them with shrewd, ghostly eyes. "You saw them, didn't you? Actually spoke with them?" There seemed no point in denying it. Harry nodded. "In the corridor behind Barnabas, the Barmy's tapestry. They were awake, really awake. Extraordinary. Nick breathed. "You three do have a knack for being in the right place at remarkable times." "What did they say?" "That we should hold on to each other," Ron said simply. "That friendship matters more than anything." Wise words from wise portraits, though I suspect they were simply reflecting what they observed in you three, the bonds you've already built. Nick drifted toward the fireplace, passing through a chair without seeming to notice. The castle will return to normal now. The magic will settle back into its usual patterns. But nights like last night remind us what Hogwarts truly is beneath the lessons and rules. A living thing, ancient and powerful and capable of wonder. "Will you remember?" Harry asked, like the portrait said they would. "Of course. Ghosts forget nothing. It's both blessing and curse. I'll carry last night with me for the next 500 years, should I last that long." Nick smiled, his head wobbling slightly with the movement. "As will you, I imagine. Some memories burn brighter than others." The sun had fully cleared the mountains now, flooding the common room with warm, golden light. The grey dimness of pre-dawn gave way to true morning. As if this were a signal, they heard movement from the dormitory staircases, footsteps, voices, the sounds of students beginning to wake. "And that's my cue to depart," Nick said. "The day begins, and I have my own duties to attend. Enjoy your snow day, young ones. You've earned it." He vanished through the wall, leaving them alone for just a few moments more, before the first sleepy students began emerging from the dormitories. A group of second years came down first, immediately rushing to the windows with exclamations of delight at the snow. Then more students appeared, third years, fourth years, all drawn to the windows to see the transformation outside. The common room filled with excited chatter about cancelled classes and potential snowball fights, and whether the Quidditch pitch would be playable. Fred and George bounded down from the boys' dormitory, took one look at the snow, and immediately began planning what they described as the greatest snow battle Hogwarts has ever seen. "We'll need teams," Fred said, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Strategy," George added. "Fortifications. Maybe some minor enchantments on the snowballs. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make things interesting." "You'll do no such thing." Percy's voice came from the stairs, though he too looked impressed by the snow. "If you bewitch snowballs and someone gets hurt, you'll lose Gryffindor 100 points. "Always so negative, Percy," Fred said cheerfully. Through it all, Harry, Ron, and Hermione remained by their window, holding on to the peaceful moment for just a bit longer. Other students might see only the snow, the cancelled classes, the opportunity for fun. But the three of them knew what the night had held, what the castle had revealed. "We should clean up now," Hermione said again, this time with more conviction. "And probably get cleaned up ourselves. I must look a fright." They worked quickly, vanishing the blankets back to wherever Hermione had summoned them from, returning the chess pieces to Ron's pocket, collecting the various mugs and plates to leave by the portrait hole for the house elves to collect. Within minutes, there was no evidence they'd spent the entire night in the common room. "I'm going to wash up," Ron announced, "and possibly sleep for a few more hours in an actual bed. My neck is killing me." "Good idea," Harry agreed, though he felt strangely energized despite the lack of proper sleep. "Meet back down here for breakfast." They separated, heading to their respective dormitories. Harry climbed the stairs to the boys' room, noting that most of his roommates were still asleep. Dean and Seamus sprawled in their beds, Neville's curtains drawn. He moved quietly to his trunk, gathering clean clothes. But before heading to the bathroom, he paused at the window in the dormitory. From here, he could see a different angle of the grounds. The path toward Hagrid's hut, the edge of the Forbidden Forest, the mountains beyond. All of it transformed by snow and magic into something beautiful and strange. Last night, he'd witnessed something most students would never see. The castle at its most honest, most powerful. He'd spoken with the founders themselves, heard their wisdom, felt their approval, and through it all, he'd been with his two best friends, the people who'd become his family in every way that mattered. Harry Potter, who'd spent so many years feeling alone and unwanted, now stood in a magical castle, surrounded by people who cared about him, having just experienced a night of wonder he'd remember forever. He looked back at the snow-covered landscape one more time, then smiled and turned away to face the new day. Some nights changed everything. Last night had changed nothing about his circumstances. He'd still face challenges, still have to deal with Voldemort eventually, still navigate the complicated business of growing up. But it had changed something inside him. It had reminded him that he belonged here, that Hogwarts was home, that friendship and warmth and magic were real and worth holding on to. And that, Harry thought, as he headed for the showers, was everything that mattered. By the time Harry returned to the common room, clean and dressed in fresh robes, the space had transformed from the peaceful sanctuary of early morning into organized chaos. It seemed every Gryffindor in the tower had woken simultaneously and decided that the snow was too magnificent to waste a single moment indoors. Fred and George had commandeered a table and were sketching battle plans on a large piece of parchment, complete with tactical positions and what looked suspiciously like trajectory calculations. A crowd of younger students surrounded them, offering suggestions that ranged from practical to absurd. "We could charm the snow to regenerate," a third-year girl suggested. "That's actually not bad," George said, making a note. "Self-replenishing ammunition. Until McGonagall finds out and assigns us detention until graduation," Fred added cheerfully. Percy stood nearby, attempting to organize the chaos with limited success. "Everyone needs to eat breakfast first. You can't go out in this cold on empty stomachs." "Percy's right, for once," Ron said, appearing at Harry's elbow. He'd changed into a thick jumper, one of Mrs. Weasley's creations in maroon, and looked more refreshed than Harry felt. Though I'd never tell him that directly. His head's big enough already. Hermione joined them moments later, her hair pulled back in a practical plait, already wearing her warmest cloak. "I just saw the notice board. McGonagall's cancelled all morning classes, but we're supposed to report to the Great Hall for announcements at 9. That gives us an hour," Ron calculated. Time for proper breakfast. They made their way through the portrait hole, the fat lady looking considerably more cheerful in daylight than she had during the storm. "Mind the corridors, dears. Still quite chilly, though the house elves have been working miracles with the warming charms." She wasn't exaggerating about the cold. The corridor beyond was frigid enough to make their breath visible, though not as intensely cold as it had been at midnight. The torches burned with normal flames now, the blue tinge gone. Through the windows they passed, sunlight streamed in, illuminating dust motes that danced in the beams. The castle felt different in daylight after the storm. The charged electric quality had vanished, but something subtle remained. A contentedness, perhaps, as though Hogwarts itself was satisfied with how the night had gone. The stones seemed warmer beneath Harry's feet, and the paintings they passed looked unusually animated, chatting amongst themselves about the weather. Quite a storm, a wizard in Tudor dress called out to them. Haven't seen its like in my frame since 1532. They descended the marble staircase to find the entrance hall bustling with activity. House elves moved purposefully, carrying buckets of salt and sand, presumably to treat the outdoor paths. The great oak doors stood open despite the cold, and Harry could see several professors outside, wands raised, clearing the main courtyard with methodical precision. Professor Flitwick stood on a conjured platform, directing snow into massive piles that would make perfect fortifications later. Professor Sprout was reinforcing the path to the greenhouses, muttering about her precious plants and hoping the heating charms had held. Even Snape was present, though he looked deeply irritated by the entire situation, vanishing snow with sharp, aggressive wand movements. Merlin, Snape looks cheerful, Ron muttered. Betty's thrilled his dungeons stayed warm, while everyone else froze. The great hall was warm and welcoming, the enchanted ceiling now showing a brilliant blue sky with only a few wispy clouds. Sunlight poured through the high windows, and the house tables were laden with more food than usual, clearly the house elves' way of ensuring everyone stayed warm and energized. They found seats at the Gryffindor table and loaded their plates with everything from porridge to sausages to toast with jam. Harry discovered he was ravenously hungry, his body apparently catching up with the fact that he'd been awake most of the night. "Look at that ceiling," Hermione said, gazing upward. "Yesterday evening it was grey and threatening. Now it's perfect. The castle's magic really does reflect the actual weather precisely." "More importantly, look at that food," Ron said, reaching for a second helping of eggs. "The house elves have outdone themselves." The hall filled rapidly as students from all houses arrived, everyone buzzing with excitement about the snow. Harry noticed the Hufflepuff table was particularly animated. They had a clear view of the badger symbol on the grounds from their position, and several students were debating whether to try to preserve it somehow. At the Ravenclaw table, a group of older students were engaged in what looked like a serious discussion about the magical properties of snow, complete with reference books already open beside their breakfast plates. Some things never changed. Even the Slytherins seemed affected by the general good mood, though they maintained their characteristic reserve. Malfoy sat with Crabbe and Goyle, looking like he wanted to sneer at everyone's enthusiasm, but couldn't quite manage it in the face of such magnificent weather. The staff table was only partially occupied. Professors continued to drift in, many looking tired, clearly having been up early dealing with storm aftermath. Dumbledore sat in his high-backed chair, looking as serene as ever, his blue eyes twinkling as he surveyed his students. At precisely 9 o'clock, Dumbledore rose, and the hall fell silent. The headmaster didn't need to raise his voice or cast a sonorous charm. His mere presence commanded attention. "Good morning," he said warmly. "I trust everyone weathered the storm comfortably." A general murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. "Excellent. I have several announcements regarding today's altered schedule. First, all morning classes are cancelled to allow our dedicated staff to ensure the castle and grounds are safe and accessible. This was met with cheers, quickly hushed by stern looks from various professors. However, afternoon classes will proceed as normal, assuming the clearing efforts continue successfully. A few groans greeted this news, but they were half-hearted. Everyone had expected some classes to continue. Second, Dumbledore continued, the grounds are now open for recreation, but with several important restrictions. The Forbidden Forest remains absolutely off-limits. The snow has made it even more dangerous than usual. The lake is frozen but has not been tested for safety, so no one is to venture onto it. And while snowball fights are permitted, any use of magic to enhance, enchant, or otherwise modify snow projectiles will result in immediate detention. Fred and George looked personally targeted by this last rule, exchanging disappointed glances. Finally, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled more brightly. I would like to acknowledge that last night's storm was more than just severe weather. Those sensitive to such things may have noticed the castle's magic responding to the conditions in unusual ways. This is perfectly normal and nothing to be alarmed about. Hogwarts has weathered countless storms over its 1,000-year history and will weather countless more. It is a testament to the founders' vision that their creation not only endures, but thrives. Harry felt Hermione stiffen beside him. Dumbledore's words seemed almost directed at them, though his gaze swept the entire hall impartially. Now then, eat hearty, dress warmly, and enjoy this gift of a snow day. But do be back inside by the time afternoon classes begin. Dismissed. The hall erupted into excited chatter as students began planning their morning. The Weasley twins immediately gathered their supporters for the great snow battle. A group of Hufflepuff girls were organizing a snow sculpture competition. Some students simply wanted to explore the transformed grounds and take in the beauty. "What do you want to do?" Hermione asked, finishing her tea. Harry considered. Part of him wanted to join the chaos, to throw himself into snowball fights and winter games with everyone else. But another part, the part still carrying the weight and wonder of last night, wanted something quieter. "Walk to the lake," he suggested. "Just the three of us. We can't go on it, but we can look." "Perfect," Ron agreed immediately, "before everyone else tramples all over everything." They bundled up in the entrance hall, cloaks, scarves, gloves that Hermione produced from somewhere, probably her endlessly useful bag. The cold hit them as soon as they stepped outside, but it was a clean, crisp cold, invigorating rather than unpleasant. The courtyard had been cleared, but beyond it, the grounds remained pristine. Their boots crunched through snow that came up to their knees in places, the sound loud in the morning quiet. Most students were still inside, finishing breakfast or gathering supplies for their snow battles. They walked slowly, not talking much, simply taking in the transformation. Everything familiar had become new. The path to Hagrid's hut was a smooth white trail through deeper snow. The vegetable patch was buried completely. Even Hagrid's enormous pumpkins were now just mysterious mounds of white. Smoke rose from Hagrid's chimney, and they could see him through the window, apparently brewing tea. He spotted them and waved enthusiastically, and they detoured to say hello. "Harry, Ron, Hermione," Hagrid boomed as he opened the door. Come in. Fang and me have been watching the sunrise. Beautiful, weren't it?" They crowded into his warm cabin, Fang immediately attempting to climb into Harry's lap, despite being the size of a small sofa. Quite a storm, Hagrid said, pouring enormous mugs of tea. The creatures in the forest were all stirred up. Could hear 'em howling and calling all night. Magic does that to 'em, gets 'em excited. Thestrals were flying circles around the castle at midnight. Beautiful sight, if ye could see 'em. Could you? Hermione asked. See them, I mean. Hagrid's expression grew somber. Aye, I can see 'em. Seen enough death in me time. He shook off the mood deliberately. But that's not for this morning. This is a day for enjoyment. You three head into the lake. Just to look, Harry said. Dumbledore said it's not tested for safety. Smart man, our headmaster. Ice is probably thick enough, but better safe than sorry. Especially with the giant squid down there. Don't know how it handles being frozen in, but I wouldn't want to be the one to find out by falling through. Hagrid grinned. Off with you then. I've got to feed the creatures. They're all extra hungry after the cold night. They said goodbye and continued their walk. The path down to the lake was challenging, the snow deeper here where it had drifted. They helped each other over the worst spots, Ron pulling Hermione over a particularly deep section, Harry offering his hand when Ron nearly lost his footing. The lake was breathtaking. The entire surface was frozen solid, covered in snow that sparkled in the morning sun like crushed diamonds. The mountains beyond reflected perfectly in the smooth white surface, creating a mirror image that made it hard to tell where earth ended and sky began. They stood at the edge in silence, three friends at the boundary between the castle and the wilder world beyond. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of Hogwarts waking fully, distant shouts and laughter as the snow battles began, the occasional burst of magical light from the castle windows. I've been thinking, Ron said suddenly, about what the Founders said, about choice mattering more than destiny. What about it? Harry asked. Just that we could have been anywhere, right? I mean, we're all at Hogwarts because of choices. You chose Gryffindor even though the hat considered Slytherin. Hermione chose to come to Hogwarts even though she grew up not knowing magic existed. I chose to, well, I didn't really choose anything specific, but I choose every day to be your friend instead of getting jealous or feeling left out or whatever. You're never left out, Harry said firmly. I know. That's what I'm saying. We choose this. Ron gestured between the three of them. Every day. And that makes it real. Makes it matter. The Founders understood that, Hermione said quietly. They built something that could last because they gave people choices. Which house to value, which friends to make, which kind of person to become. That's why Hogwarts endures. It's not just a building, it's a place where choices matter. Harry thought about his own choices over the past 3 years, choosing friendship over solitude, choosing bravery over safety, choosing to trust, to care, to connect with others despite knowing it made him vulnerable. Every choice had led him here, to this moment, standing by a frozen lake with the 2 best friends he'd ever had. Last night was special, he said. Seeing the Founders, watching the castle's magic, all of it. But this is special too. This, right now, is just as important. Because we're choosing it, Ron said, understanding. Exactly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, turning the snow from golden to brilliant white. In the distance, they could hear Professor McGonagall's voice calling out instructions, probably organizing the snow-clearing efforts or preventing the Weasley twins from doing something ill-advised. We should head back soon, Hermione said eventually. "If we want hot chocolate before afternoon classes start." "Afternoon classes," Ron groaned. Why did Dumbledore have to ruin a perfect day? "Because he's a headmaster, and that's his job," Hermione said primly, but she was smiling. They turned back toward the castle, retracing their footprints in the snow. Hogwarts rose before them, majestic and ancient and home. The morning sun caught the towers and turned them into something from a storybook, a castle from legend, where magic was real and anything was possible. As they walked, other students began appearing on the grounds. The snow battle had begun in earnest on one side of the castle, shouts and laughter echoing across the white landscape. Near the greenhouses, a group was indeed building snow sculptures, their efforts already producing what looked like a decent snow lion. By the time they reached the entrance hall, they were glowing with cold and exercise, their cheeks flushed, snow clinging to their robes. The warmth of the castle enveloped them like a hug. "Hot chocolate," Ron suggested hopefully. "Hot chocolate," Hermione agreed. They made their way back to Gryffindor Tower, passing portraits that called out greetings, suits of armor that had apparently been gossiping about the storm, and house elves hurrying about their endless tasks. The castle felt alive, busy, full of purpose and energy. The common room was less crowded now. Most Gryffindors were outside enjoying the snow. They claimed their favorite chairs by the fire, which someone had built up again, and Dobby appeared almost immediately with a tray of hot chocolate and fresh pastries. "Harry Potter and his friends are needing warming up," the elf said happily. "Dobby is seeing you walk to the lake. Very beautiful, but very cold." "It was beautiful," Harry agreed, accepting his mug gratefully. "Thank you, Dobby." The elf beamed and vanished with a pop. They settled into their chairs, cradling their warm mugs, and for a long moment no one spoke. There was nothing that needed saying. They'd witnessed something extraordinary together, had experienced magic in ways most students never would, had learned truths about Hogwarts and themselves that would stay with them forever. But more than any single magical moment, they had this ordinary friendship, chosen and real and steadfast, the quiet comfort of simply being together, no words necessary, no grand adventures required. Just three people who'd found each other and decided to stay. Outside, the snow day continued. Students played and explored. Professors worked and supervised. House elves maintained and cared for the castle. Life at Hogwarts went on as it always had, as it always would. But for Harry Potter, sitting by the fire with his best friends after a night of wonder, everything felt different. Not changed dramatically, but settled somehow. He understood now what home truly meant. Not a place, but a feeling. Not walls and stones, but warmth and belonging. He looked at Ron, who was trying to see how many marshmallows he could stack in his hot chocolate. He looked at Hermione, who was already pulling out a book, even though they'd agreed to just relax. He looked at the fire, the scarlet curtains, the familiar common room that had witnessed so many of his experiences. And Harry smiled. The storm had passed, the magic had settled, the extraordinary had become ordinary again, but the warmth, the friendship, the belonging, the sense of being exactly where he was meant to be, that remained. That would always remain. And in the end, Harry thought as he sipped his chocolate and listened to his friends' gentle bickering, that warmth was the truest magic of all.